Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to show you how I created this HDPE bowl using some old milk bottles and a couple of bottle caps. Let's get going. Now if you're going to do this project, there is a couple of things that I'd recommend having. The first is Teflon baking sheets. They go in the panini press and they make it really easy to get the plastic off. You can use greaseproof paper or something like that, but it just doesn't work quite as well and can get stuck to the plastic and rip. The second thing is a pair of silicone oven mitts. I got these off Amazon, I think they're about £6 or £7. They do the job and they're nice and comfortable, and most importantly, they keep my hands cool and protected from the heat. And then obviously you're going to need a panini press. Now I just got mine off Amazon, but anything would do as long as it can heat the plastic up and won't get too hot that it causes the plastic to melt too far where it will start to burn. Now panini presses are pretty good for this because they keep it at a consistent heat and they don't burn the plastic. So off camera I've quickly made this mould. Now it's really simple, it's just a bit of chipboard with a piece of wood as a handle, and then it's also got a piece of chipboard on the bottom here, and then some scrap pieces of wood. This is just some scrap floorboard and some scrap 2x3, and then it's literally like that. You put the piece of wood in like that and you clamp it, and that pushes pressure onto the piece of plastic, and then leave that overnight to cool. Simple as that. So for the plastic, I use these vanish tubs for the pink plastic. I just leave them overnight to get rid of the labels in some water, and then cut it up into small pieces, about this sort of size, just little offcuts. Now for the gold, I've used these sort of squash bottle lids, fairly simple, just anything you can find that has a number 2 recycling code on it or says HDPE. And then for the white plastic, which there isn't a huge amount of, there's a tiny bit but not very much, I just use these milk bottle lids and some milk bottles, which are just cut up and into small chunks like this. Now you can use any plastic as long as it has a number 2 recycling code or says HDPE. So with the plastic pretty much finished in the panini press, we're now going to move on to putting it in the mould, which will make the bowl blank. Now the plan is to press it in there, and then we're going to use this to then compress it with some clamps, but we'll see how it goes. So once I was happy with how the plastic looked, I put it into the mould. Now this was the first attempt and I wasn't quick enough about it. So unfortunately the plastic started to cure before I'd fully got it into the mould. So I put it back into the panini press to soften it and heat it back up. I left it in there for about 5 to 10 minutes until it was nice and hot, and then I had another go. This time I was very quick about it, and I put the plastic straight into the mould and then added clamps. Now I used as many clamps as I could in order to provide the most amount of pressure. Now there were a couple of little bits in the mould where there are a few gaps, so I just used a sharp chisel to remove this plastic. Now the demolding process was very simple. Undo the clamps, unscrew the base, and then just take the plastic out. Now where the plastic had overspilled slightly, it made it a bit more difficult to take it off, so I just cut those corners off on the bandsaw just to allow easy access. Once I'd checked the blank was roughly round, I moved on to marking the centre point, and then used a pair of calipers in order to mark the circle, which I would then cut on the bandsaw. I then moved on to cutting the blank on the bandsaw. Now the one nice thing about working with plastic is it cuts and shapes really easily, so shaping out on the bandsaw was a real pleasure. The other important thing to remember about HDPE is all of the offcuts can be saved for another project. Now one thing I did find quite difficult in this bowl was actually shaping it. Now I chose to use a round scraper as the bowl gouge was just too aggressive and took too much material off. So instead I went with the round scraper, which provided a fairly clean finish, except for these ridge lines that you can see here, but that could have been smoothed out with some sanding. Now HDPE is notoriously difficult to glue to, but I found that I could put a bit of hot glue on the base of the bowl and then glue it to a normal wood faceplate as I would with all my other bowls, and that worked fine and it didn't fly off the lathe. So that's how I shaped the bowl. With the blank suitably mounted on the lathe, I then moved on to roughing it out to round. Now as I said, I primarily used the round scraper, but I did start off using the skew a little bit. Now the skew isn't designed for faceplate work, so I was very careful here and kept it flat. The only reason I opted to use it was because I was literally doing a rounding process and wasn't doing any cutting into the bowl or doing any real shaping as such. And also with the plastic, because it cuts so easy, I wasn't putting extra pressure onto the tool and creating undue amounts of force through the lathe. Now the one issue with HDPE, and all plastics for that matter, is when turning them on the lathe, they do like to create a lot of shavings and they do get caught around the lathe. Now it's the same as working with resin, you just have to be careful and stop the lathe every so often just to untangle them so they don't become a mess and get caught around the lathe. Now with all of these offcuts, I put them into a bucket so that I could use them for another project. For shaping the interior of the plate, I just used my round scraper, taking nice gentle passes so that I wasn't too aggressive with the material. Again, this turned like butter. It was really easy and really nice to turn. The one other thing you need to be mindful of here is air bubbles. If you do find an air bubble and you can see it, either pop it or stop the lathe and then put some more plastic over it. So to do this, simply heat up a bit of plastic in a panini press and you can just use that and sort of smooth it over that air bubble, and then that will prevent it from becoming a crack or just splitting on the lathe. I then did do a little bit of sanding with some 400 grit, but there wasn't really much of a point. One thing I would say is if you want more of a marbling pattern, don't mix the plastic as much. So when you're twisting the plastic, the more you twist it, the more you're going to integrate those colours. So if I was to do this again, I would perhaps not mix them quite as much, so I get more of a colour difference. Now here's another example of a blank I've just made. This is about 1 inch thick, which is about as thin as I'd go for making a plate. As you can see, you can very easily get a nice sized plate out of the mould that I made, and this is just green plastic mixed with a bit of white and dark green, and I'm pretty happy with how this one turned out. Now that's going to be turned into another plate using the same technique that I did for this one. Now in terms of finishing these plates, you don't really need to apply a finish as the plastic itself has already that sort of shine to it. But if you wanted to, you could use some micro mesh and just cut it back until you get a really fine finish, and then maybe you could try putting some polish on it, but I'm not sure how well that would work. I hope you've enjoyed this video. It was really different trying something like this. Now, I haven't done anything with HDPE before, but I thought this was a good learning curve and something I really enjoyed, something a bit different from the usual woodwork. So I'm definitely going to be doing some more HDPE projects, including some proper bowls, some paperweights, and some other things that I've got in the works, like key rings. But for now, we'll just see where this project takes me. But thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it.